$1, the man said. The crowd chuckled, a dry, brittle sound like mesquite brush snapping under boot heels. Me, I stood at the edge of it all, close enough to feel the heat off their jeers, but far enough my shadow didn't touch the wagon. There, under the low beams behind Red Cactus Saloon, they'd made a stage out of a buckboard. A woman, head-bagged, wrists tied, feet raw and weeping red into the boards, stood with her back straight, chin up, like someone had dared her to look broken and she'd spat in their eye for it. Vince Cordell, slick and pink from too much sun and whiskey, grinned at the gathering. "Real wild stock, folks, $1 all yours." Laughter rolled, some from old men with hands like tree roots, others from boys not old enough to shave, eyes cold as stone. The kind of laughter that doesn't need a punchline, just a victim. I could have turned away. I've done it before, turned my back on ugly things. But that day, Gettysburg ghosts pressed hard in my chest. You learn, after a while, you don't get to choose the fights that matter most. She stumbled once, just a hitch, knees gone for a blink, and that was all it took. Before I knew what I was about, my voice was out. $1. Quiet, flat, a stone in the river. You could hear the air go out of them all at once. Vince turned, that grin wilting. "Sold to Abel Rourke, the lonely fella out by Cotton Draw." His words spat out dry, and the crowd, God, they couldn't decide whether to laugh or swallow it whole. I climbed up, careful not to startle her. The sack smelled of dirt and old sweat. My hands shook just a little as I cut the rope from her wrists. Her arms came down stiff, slow, but she didn't shrink away. I pulled the sack from her head. The world seemed to stop, all those eyes behind me growing sudden and shy. I expected, well, I didn't know what I expected. Some broken thing, someone hollowed out. But when I met her gaze, I found coals burning deep and steady, stubborn. Not a tear, not a plea. Her jaw squared. She was not afraid, and she was not beaten. For a moment, I forgot the crowd. I was looking into a storm that had learned to keep its thunder quiet. Her name, I didn't know it yet. Her story, even less. All I knew was the rope I cut tied me to something I wasn't ready for. Not just her. The weight of every eye that watched, every smirk, every ghost I hadn't buried right. I put the $1 in Vince's hand, cold as a judge's verdict, and the crowd started to murmur again. Some folks looked away, ashamed, maybe, of what they'd witnessed. Others just spit and shuffled off, chasing the next mean thing. I took her hand, careful, and helped her down. She stood beside me, not behind, and that made the difference. Her feet bled onto the dust. I offered my arm, and she took it. Her grip was strong, not desperate. We walked out slow, like folks heading up a hill at the end of a funeral. The buckboard, the jeers, even Vince's sour grin faded behind us. But I could feel their eyes following, all the way up Cotton Draw. I thought I'd paid for a person, but standing in the twilight, $1 lighter and 1,000 pounds heavier, I knew better. I'd bought myself into a war I never saw coming. It was a long, quiet walk back to Cotton Draw. The sun hung low behind Yucca Ridge, painting the hard-pan gold, the scrub and grazing sheep casting shadows thin as fence wire. I led the old mare slow, saddle creaking, boots trailing dust. She, Tala, though I didn't know her name yet, followed behind, barefoot, blood mixing with the dust and the stubborn pride in each step. She neither asked nor thanked, never once looked back at the town or the crowd. I respected that, though a part of me ached for what must have been burning inside her. My place sits on a stretch of land where nothing grows easy. House was built in a time when hands shook from hope, not from old wounds. The main cabin stands squat, roof patched with tin, window glass wavy and pale. To the side, a small barn, hardly more than a lean-to, faces east, a promise to the morning sun that it'll stand one more day. There's a wind pump, stubborn as any cuss I ever knew, groaning for water that sometimes comes slow as forgiveness. We reached the yard just as the last light faded off the ridge. I stopped, turned to her, and pointed. "You can stay there, the little barn. There's water by the pump behind the well." My voice was low, not cold, but not inviting either. You learn not to promise more than you can keep. She said nothing, just a small nod, eyes shadowed. She stepped toward the barn, and that was that. I watched her cross the yard, the cornflower shawl still hanging over her shoulders, ragged and faded but neat. When she vanished inside, I finally let myself exhale. That night, sleep was a stubborn stranger. I lay in my old iron bed, listening to the wind scrape the eaves, the far-off howl of a coyote prowling the arroyos. The only thing steady was the tick of Mary's old pocket watch, cracked but still honest. Every hour it clicked, a tired, hollow sound, like a heart remembering something it can't quite forgive. In the morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to stir the dead, spooned up a plate of beans and left it on the porch, not saying a word. Sun climbed, shadows shrank, and I worked the fence line, eyes always drifting back toward the barn. Didn't see her take the food, but by noon, the plate was clean, mug empty, and the shawl hung in the same careful way across the railing. Silent thanks, or just the way of things, I couldn't say. Days passed like that. I'd see a flash of her moving by the pump, hair loose, sleeves rolled. Not a sound, not even a sigh. But little things started to shift. The latch on the front gate, always crooked, was set right and tight one morning, better than I'd ever managed. A shirt I'd torn stacking firewood showed up beside my boots, the seams stitched neat as any store-bought. I never asked. She never told. I started to talk, not to her, but to the air around us, the cows, the weather, the ache in my knee come rain or nightfall. No answers, but I could feel her listening, some pulse in the quiet that wasn't there before. Some nights I'd find myself talking to Mary, too. Old habits, I guess. Grief makes its own ghosts, and sometimes the only way to stand up to them is to share the room. One evening, after fixing the loose board on the porch, again, I caught myself watching her hands. Calloused, nimble, never trembling, always sure. She worked in silence, but every gesture said, "I'm here, I'm not gone yet." That was the new silence of cotton draw, not the emptiness I'd lived with, but a steady presence filling the cracks in the walls and in me. The house didn't feel bigger, but it felt less lonely. Late that night, when the wind picked up, the old nail on the porch rattled loose. I sat on the steps, rolling it between my fingers, thinking how some things hold on longer than they ought, just waiting for someone to fix them. Ain't much, maybe, but it was a start. She didn't answer when I spoke, not in words anyway, but sometimes silences got more weight than talking. That's how it was at Cotton Draw those days. I'd come home dog-tired from walking fence, dust caked in my ears, and notice the front gate swinging easy, latch fitting flush and sure. Not my doing. I'd tried 100 times, always left it crooked. Now it closed with a soft snick and didn't rattle in the wind. Same with my work shirt, favorite old blue one, torn all down the sleeve. I found it folded on the porch bench, seams stitched neat, not a thread out of place. Whoever did it took the time, didn't leave a mark. Still, I knew. In that ranch house there were only 2 sets of hands. I found myself talking more, not at her, but out loud to the cows standing in the gully or the stray rooster that kept escaping the coop. Sometimes I'd complain about the damn pump by the well that never held a prime, or grumble about the dry spell that showed no sign of breaking. No response, not even a nod. But at times I'd look up, spot her somewhere close, a shadow moving near the barn door, hair falling loose, sleeves rolled past her elbows, head bent over some task. Once I caught her watching the sky before dusk, standing by the fence, hands resting on the top rail. She never said a thing, but I knew she heard every word I spoke. The house itself seemed to breathe different, less hollow, somehow steadier, like the beams had settled for good. There was a cornflower blue shawl I'd left folded on the step, figuring she might want it come evening chill. Next morning, it was gone. When I brought out the coffee and beans, I'd find the plate wiped clean, cup rinsed and left upside down on the porch rail, a small sign in a big world. If you'd asked, I couldn't have told you what we were building, just that it felt like something better than before. Quieter, but warmer. The sort of quiet a man starts missing after too many years without it. As days slipped by, I noticed little things. The stable broom, always missing bristles, now swept the yard clean as a whistle. The woodpile grew higher, logs stacked just so. Her work, I was sure of it. On Sundays, I'd spot her walking the fence line at dawn, eyes searching the horizon, steps light but firm. She never strayed far. There was a boundary she respected, even if no one spoke of it. The pain in my knee grew sharper as the weather cooled, and sometimes I cursed under my breath, hobbling through chores. I knew she saw. Sometimes I'd find the old ointment jar refilled, set by my bedside, or an extra blanket laid over the chair for cold nights. Acts of kindness, quiet as snowfall. We didn't speak, not truly. I'd mutter about the state of the cattle, whether rain would come. She'd listen, always with that air of not judging, not pitying, just being there. It was enough. The empty space in the house changed shape, grew softer, like a dent in an old armchair where someone used to sit. There was a feeling I couldn't name. Maybe gratitude, maybe something closer to hope, though I'd long ago given up planting seeds like that. I started thinking less about what I'd lost, more about what could still be patched up, slow as mending an old shirt, one stitch at a time. The blue shawl hung sometimes from the rail, sometimes from her shoulders. It became a sign. She was here, she wasn't hiding, and neither was I. That was how it was in those days. Imperfect, maybe, but honest. Sometimes a man just needs to know that his words, even the quietest, aren't lost in the wind. Maybe, just maybe, something good could grow out here again. The sky that afternoon had a look to it. Dark, swirling, the kind that sends cattle for cover and makes a rancher's bones ache before the wind even starts up. I watched the horizon while mending a split rail, noticed the clouds stacking up black over Yucca Ridge, heavy as old regrets. By the time I'd finished, the air had gone still, waited. Birds vanished, and not even the jackrabbits risked the open. I hurried to round up what stock I could, hollering at a stubborn heifer that never liked storms. But my mind was half on the barn, half on the house, and half, if a man can have such a thing, on her. I found her standing outside the barn, face turned up to that boiling sky, arms folded, hair wild in the wind. She looked smaller somehow, framed by the empty land and all that trouble in the clouds. For a moment I thought she might just stand there and let the storm come. Her eyes narrowed, set hard on the horizon, like she knew that thunder's voice by name. Lightning struck close, so sharp the hair on my arms jumped. She flinched, a quick, honest thing, her hand going to her throat, knuckles white. In that moment I saw a crack in her calm, not fear of me or the house, but of something that had chased her much farther than Mesquite Bend. I called out, maybe rougher than I meant, "Get inside, now!" She didn't move at first. Only when the thunder rolled and rain started in fat, cold drops did she turn. I ran, boots slapping mud, grabbed her arm, not hard, just firm. We dashed for the cabin, ducked inside just as the sky broke open and poured itself over Cotton Draw. We stood in the shadows by the door, soaked through, hearts beating so loud I could hear hers echo mine. The air inside was warm and smelled of dry wood, coffee grounds, a little smoke. Water dripped from my hat, pooled at our feet. The world outside turned to fury, rain battering the roof, wind shoving the walls, lightning painting the windows with wild white streaks. She pressed herself into a corner, breathing deep, hands balled into fists. I handed her a blanket, tried not to hover, tried not to crowd her with worry. I watched her for a moment, her shoulders stiff, eyes rimmed with something brittle and scared, and I realized the storm outside was nothing compared to what raged in her chest. We waited. I set the kettle on the stove, found myself talking about the last big storm, about Mary patching leaks with flour sacks, about how the cottonwoods never broke, only bent with the wind. She didn't answer, just listened, gaze fixed on the window where the rain chased itself sideways. Thunder cracked again, close as a promise, and for the briefest second, her guard slipped. Her lips trembled, eyes bright with something I wouldn't call tears. She shuddered, a living thing facing an old enemy with no shield but her own will. That's when I saw it. Her fear wasn't of me, or even of the ranch. It was of memory, of the kind of pain you carry alone for too long. After a while, the storm eased. The thunder rolled on past the ridge, rain softening to a whisper on the roof. The cabin felt different, smaller, safer, somehow joined in its stillness. She let out a long breath, pulled the blanket tighter. For a moment, our eyes met. I nodded and she did too, and that was enough. The old pocket watch, usually ticking on the shelf, had gone silent. Damp had stilled its gears. The only sound left was the rain, gentle now, and the hush of two lives sharing a single quiet. If I'd known what was coming, maybe I'd have sharpened a rifle that night. But instead, I sat by the fire and sharpened a hoe. Morning broke gentle after the storm. The world rinsed clean, sky wide and blue as a promise. I brewed the coffee stronger than usual, poured 2 mugs, set one by the door with a plate of leftover cornbread. Just a habit now, something settled between us without a word. Sunlight angled across the porch, catching on every puddle, turning plain mud into little pieces of mirror. As I bent to pick up the empty plate she'd left behind, I saw something in the dust just beside the step, a mark scratched neat as a signature, a wolf's paw 3 claws deep, drawn with a stick or maybe her finger. At first I thought it was a message meant for herself, but it was too deliberate, too sure. It was a sign, and I knew enough about signs to pay attention. I went inside, found Mary's old botany book, the one she'd kept tucked between the flour sacks, pressed with flowers and brittle leaves. I turned the pages slow, careful, with the spine, until I found what I was looking for, a yellow desert marigold, flattened and faded, with a slip of paper beside it, Mary's notes on native plants and the tracks of wild animals. There, written in a hand neater than mine ever was, it said, Tala Wolf. I closed the book, let the silence settle around me. The name fit. Strong, quiet, not easy to break. The kind of name you give something that survives what it shouldn't. Next morning, I placed the plate out as always. Only this time, when she came up the steps to take it, I cleared my throat and said it, soft but sure. Tala. She froze for half a heartbeat, cup halfway to her lips. Didn't look at me, not quite, but I saw the way her shoulders eased. Just a little, like she'd set down a weight she'd carried too long. The day went by as days do on a ranch. Fences to mend, water to haul, sweat and dust the price of staying alive. But something felt different, lighter maybe, like 2 people might be finding a way to share a patch of earth without stepping on each other's shadows. Late that afternoon, I came back to the porch, wiping the dust off my boots. She was there, sitting quiet, weaving a string of beads, bits of bone and wood knotted on rawhide. She didn't look up, but when she finished, she left it hanging from the rail. A wolf track, carved careful into the center bead. A gift or a message. Either way, it said more than words could. At dusk, as I brought in the last bucket of water, she spoke for the first time. Just one word, but it stopped me in my tracks. Abel. My name. Plain and steady, like she'd always known it. It didn't feel like a question or a plea. It felt like something old and true. A name called across the distance between two lost souls. I didn't answer. Not right then. Some things are better left to settle, like mud in a creek after rain. I stood there on the porch, beads in my hand, her shadow stretching long behind her as the sun slipped away. I reckoned maybe that's how belonging starts, not with a promise or a bargain, but with a name spoken gentle in the evening light. A name's a roof, my father used to say. You give a body a name, you give them a place to stand. That night I lay awake listening to the quiet, the storm's memory fading with each slow breath. The wolf-track beads rested on my chest, light as hope. I thought of all the things we carry, old pain, old stories, old debts, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, we could start to lay them down. Some things on a ranch can't be rushed. Mending trust is one of them. The days grew longer, sun climbing higher as spring pressed into summer, and the land around Cotton Draw began to yield just enough to keep a body going. Tala moved about her work with a quiet purpose that reminded me of old hands I'd known, folks who did their fixing in silence, letting sweat speak for them. It started small. She'd mend the roof of the chicken shed, patching holes with bits of tin and wire I'd given up on. The watering trough, always leaking, always a thorn in my side, ran full and steady after she spent a morning there, sleeves rolled and brow set. One hot afternoon, I came around back to see her burning tumbleweeds, the smoke trailing off over the fence line in lazy blue ribbons. She moved with certainty, never waiting to be told, never asking for thanks. I joined in where I could, helping her roll barrels, showing how the old pump needed coaxing, not force. We spoke little, but not out of awkwardness. There was a peace in those quiet hours, the kind that soaks into your bones and makes a man think maybe he could belong somewhere again. Evenings after supper, I'd light a fire in the stove and pull down Mary's old books. My reading wasn't anything fancy, words slow and plain, sometimes tangled on my tongue, but Tala sat near, hands busy with her beads, or sometimes just watching the flame. Every so often, when I'd stumble over a big word or a Latin name for some weed, she'd smile, just a quick upturn at the corner of her mouth. It was the sort of smile you earned by showing up day after day, not asking for more than what life would give. People began to notice the changes. Doc Hester Quinn rode out one Sunday, bringing ointment for my knee and a sack of flour from town. She glanced at Tala, then at me, and said nothing about the way the barn looked straighter or the chicken coop stood tall. She just handed me the jar and winked, like secrets were best kept between folks who understood pain. Widow Nora Bell from the livery stopped by with a dress she claimed was too fine for horsework, but good for the garden. Tala took it, folding it with care, a quiet thank you in her eyes. Nolan Begay, the blacksmith, hammered out a new head for my old fence mallet, left it hanging on the gate with a note, "For good hands." I found myself looking forward to those small gifts, the tokens of neighborly grace that used to pass me by. The old nail on the porch, loose since winter, finally got hammered down tight, this time by Tala, her hammering steady, not a wasted blow. The days slipped by, work growing lighter for being shared. Sometimes in the golden hour, we'd sit side by side on the steps, letting the world cool down around us. She never pressed, never pulled. We just sat, the hush of dusk and the far-off cry of a hawk stitching the day closed. That was the rhythm of Cotton Draw now. Wood smoke in the air, soft laughter over firelight, a shirt mended and a fence made true. It wasn't happiness in the way folks talked about, but it was something sturdy, something real, peace, slow built from things most folks might overlook. And every evening, as the last light faded, I'd see her blue shawl draped across the rail, soft as forgiveness, sure as another day coming. Trouble never needs much of a reason out here, and most days it just blows in with the dust. Word travels faster than a rail car in Mesquite Bend, especially when it's got a mean edge to it and folks are itching for something new to talk about. It started with whispers in Red Cactus Saloon. Vince Cordell, nursing his pride with cheap whiskey, couldn't stand the sideways glances, the laughter about how the widower from Cotton Draw walked off with what Vince called his property for the price of a poke. The men at the bar, old-timers who remembered the war, young hands with nothing but time, laughed behind their hands. "Let him stew," they said. "Reckon even Abel Rourke can't fix what he just bought." But pride festers if you leave it too long, and Vince was never the kind to let a slight go. Deputy Evan Pike, new to his badge and still soft behind the ears, let Vince buy him a drink and started listening to his talk about law and order. Vince spun stories, said the woman was Comanche, said Abel had no right, said the town had a stake in keeping things proper. It didn't matter that none of it was true. Out here, a story can do more damage than a six-shooter. Bertie McCall, who worked the telegraph, heard the talk and watched folks' eyes dart when Abel or Tala's names came up. Nolan Begay, hammering horseshoes in the livery, caught the rumors too, and his jaw set tight, knowing how easy it is for a crowd to turn mean. But for most, it was just something to fill the space between chores, a joke, a warning, a piece of gossip to pass the time. Back at Cotton Draw, I felt the shift in the air, though no one said a word to my face. When I came into town for supplies, the stares lasted a beat too long. The clerk at the mercantile counted my change twice, lips tight, eyes not meeting mine. Outside, someone spat in the dirt, just loud enough for me to hear, but I let it slide. The ranch, at least, stayed honest. Work waiting, grass growing, sun coming up whether folks talked or not. Still, I couldn't help but keep a hand close to my belt these days, and an eye out for signs that trouble might find its way down the lane. Tala, for her part, didn't flinch. She kept to her tasks, tending the garden, stacking wood, sweeping the stoop. But there was a wariness to her steps, a way she glanced toward the road at sunset, measuring distance and time. The saloon stayed loud late into the night. Vince poured his anger into every glass, gathering a small circle of men who wanted to belong to something, even if it was just someone else's grudge. Deputy Pike, too green to see the game, nodded along. They talked law, but what they really wanted was someone to blame for how little power they truly had. Sometimes evil doesn't need a knife. Just a crowd and a joke told one too many times. I saw it in the way Widow Nora Bell swept her porch, watching every rider that passed, or how Doc Quinn stopped by unannounced, checking the color in my face and the tension in the air. I hammered a fresh plank over the old split rail, eyes on the road, and told myself I was ready. But some storms don't show their hand until they're at your door, and at Cotton Draw, the wind was picking up. It was late one afternoon when the dust rose on the horizon. 4 riders cutting straight for Cotton Draw, not bothering to hide their coming. I was fixing a fence post near the gate when I saw them. Vince Cordell out front, Reed Tanner, Bo Crenshaw, and Lyle Pettigrew close behind. Their faces were mean and drawn, half drunk and itching for a show. I called out, "Tala, go inside, lock the door." She looked up from the garden, wiped her hands on her skirt, and with a small nod slipped into the cabin. I watched the door latch shut before I turned to meet the riders. The sun behind them made long black shadows, stretching out over my yard like a warning. Vince pulled up first, boots scraping the dry dirt, a sheet of crumpled paper in his fist. He spat near my boot, then waved the paper at me. "Got a writ of retrieval here, Abel. Official enough for you?" His words were slick, but his hand twitched by his belt. I took the paper, turning it slow. Ink ran where it shouldn't. The seal a mess of red wax and broken promises. "This isn't legal," I said, steady and low. It's just a lie dressed up in Sunday best. Bo and Reed spread out, hands resting near their holsters. Lyle looked bored, watching the chicken coop, waiting for trouble like a coyote waits for scraps. Vince puffed up, voice getting louder for show. Don't matter. The town's got a say in what goes on out here. That Comanche gal, she belongs to Mesquite Bend. You think $1 makes her yours? She's ours to decide. I felt my anger flare, but kept it cold. I didn't reach for my rifle yet. She's not yours. She's not mine either, not like you mean. She's my wife. The words hung there, heavy as a rain cloud. I didn't know if it was a lie or a vow, but it was what needed saying. Vince sneered. Wife, that ain't legal, Abel. Town won't stand for it. Maybe you forgot who sets the rules. His buddies grinned, ready to take my house apart with fists or worse. That's when the door creaked. Tala stepped out onto the porch, the blue cornflower shawl over her shoulders, face calm but not afraid. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't have to. She walked down the steps and stood at my side, eyes meeting Vince's, saying clear as any judge, I will not run. For a moment, everything paused. Vince blinked, searching for weakness, but Tala didn't give him any. The other men looked away, suddenly not so eager for a fight. I stood tall, rifle in hand, not aiming, just holding it like an old truth. You can leave, I told Vince, or you can find out how serious I am. The silence was as thick as the dust in the road. Vince looked at me, then at her, then back at his men. He muttered something I couldn't hear and backed his horse away. Bo and Lyle followed. Reed glared, but even he knew a lost cause. When their dust finally settled, I let my shoulders drop. Tala was still by my side, hands loose, breathing steady. She didn't say a word, but I didn't need her to. That evening, as the sun went down behind Yucca Ridge, I fixed a cup of coffee and watched her move around the kitchen, calm as ever. The worst of the trouble had passed, for now. But I knew deep down this wasn't finished. Some men don't forgive being made to look small, and out here pride's got a long shadow. Next morning dawned dry and sharp, the kind of day when every sound carries far and clear. I saddled up at first light and rode into Mesquite Bend, the phony writ from Vince folded in my vest. I knew there'd be no peace until things were set right, not just for me or Tala, but for every quiet soul watching which way the wind would turn. Sheriff Wyatt Hale was standing on the steps of his office, sipping coffee, badge catching the sun. He's a square-built man with eyes that don't miss much. I handed him the paper. He looked it over, jaw working, and let out a low whistle. This here's the finest piece of horse manure I've seen all year, Abel. Smells like Vince Cordell's handiwork to me. He waved me inside, locking the door behind us. We sat across from each other at the old pine desk, the writ between us. Law's got to mean something out here, he said, voice quiet. If we let every loudmouth run things, this territory'll be nothing but trouble. I told him about the showdown at Cotton Draw, how Vince and his boys tried to bluff their way into my house. Sheriff Hale listened close, then set the badge down square on top of the paper. You did right by not starting a shooting match, but we'll need to settle this proper. Town council won't hold water against a sealed document, fake or not. What we need is proof. Bertie McCall came by with a telegram she'd sent to Sun Mesa County Courthouse, asking if any real writ of retrieval had ever been filed on Tala Nocona. Sheriff Hale grinned. If there's a scrap of law anywhere, Bertie'll find it. Doc Hester Quinn dropped in as well, nodding at me, then at the sheriff. I can testify about that woman's wrist, old injury, nothing to do with Vince's story about catching her stealing horses. I stitched her up last spring after she burned herself cooking for the Widow Bell. Sheriff Hale stroked his mustache. That's something, Doc. We're getting there. Abel, you and Tala come to town Friday morning. There'll be a hearing on the courthouse steps. I'll stand between you and any man that tries to drag her away." I nodded, feeling some of the dust settle inside me. Still, the air felt thick with things unsaid. I thanked the sheriff, tipped my hat to Bertie and Doc Quinn, and stepped back out into the day. Before I left, Sheriff Hale handed me back the writ, now stamped with a big red X and his badge number. "You hang on to that, Abel. Sometimes a lie's just as good as a warning. Let 'em see it and think twice." I rode home slower than I'd come, the sun baking my neck, mind turning over what was left to do. At the gate, I found Tala hanging laundry, humming a tune soft as prairie wind. I told her, "We go to town Friday. You won't stand alone." She didn't answer, just smiled, a look in her eyes that said she knew more about standing tall than I ever would. That night, I laid the sheriff's badge on the table beside the old broken watch, the law and memory side by side. I sharpened my best boots, set my hat straight, and promised myself, whatever happened at Soon Mesa, I'd stand with her, right to the end. The day before the hearing, the land felt wound tight, as if every blade of grass was waiting for something to snap. Tala rose early, braided her hair, and tied it back with a strip of blue cloth. She moved with calm purpose, but I saw how her hands lingered on the doorframe, how her eyes measured every shadow between our porch and the road. We set out for Soon Mesa at dawn, just the two of us on my old buckskin gelding, moving slow along the banks of Ocotillo Wash. The creek bed was bone dry, stones white as skulls, and the mesquite thorns snagged at our boots. Above us, the sky was cloudless, a hard and merciless blue. Halfway to town, near a bend in the wash, trouble showed itself. 4 men, Vince Cordell's boys, waited behind a stand of prickly pear. Reed Tanner, mean and twitchy, leaped out and grabbed for Tala's reins. The horse spooked, but Tala kept her seat, her face stone calm, refusing to flinch. I slid down and stood square between her and the men. "You're not taking her," I said, low and cold as I could manage. My hand rested on my belt, not drawing, just a warning. Reed smirked. "Don't need the law to tell us what's right. She's not yours, Rourke." Nolan Begay stepped out from behind the scrub. He'd been trailing us all morning, quiet as a ghost. He raised his lariat and snapped it with a sharp crack, the sound carrying up the wash. "You boys best move on," Nolan said, voice calm but steady as iron. "Town's waiting for an answer, not a brawl." Bo Crenshaw shifted his weight, uncertain. Lyle spat in the dirt, eyes darting, but Reed, stubborn as a mule, jerked his hand back and tried to pull Tala off the horse. That's when I drew my Colt and fired, not at flesh, but at Reed's hat, sending it spinning into the dust. The shot echoed down the wash, sharp and final. Reed stumbled back, hand up, cursing. "Next one's for your boot, boy," I said. "Now get." They hesitated, but Nolan's glare and the sure weight of my gun settled it. One by one, they turned and rode off. Vince's writ clutched useless in Reed's shaking hand. Tala slid off the horse and stood beside me. She didn't say a word, just picked up Reed's hat, dusted it off, and set it on a rock. No triumph, no gloating, just a clean break from the old fight. We pressed on, hearts pounding, dust caking our throats. The rest of the ride was silent, except for the wind in the creosote and Nolan's steady hoofbeats behind us. By the time we reached Soon Mesa, the sun was just cresting the courthouse roof, its red stone steps bright in the morning. Townsfolk were already gathering, some curious, some cold. A few giving nods meant more for courage than greeting. I helped Tala down, squeezed her hand, and nodded to Nolan, whose eyes said what words could not. "I'll be here if you need me." The fight was not over, but we'd made it this far, together and with the law on our side. Sun Mesa County Courthouse stood at the edge of town, its stone steps swept clean by morning wind. Folks gathered in loose knots, hats in hand, whispering the old ways, how the West always did its real work outside, not behind closed doors. Sheriff Hale waited by the door, badge glinting hard as his gaze. Tala kept close to me, her hand light but steady on my arm. Nolan Begay leaned against the rail, silent as a fence post, a silent promise in the tilt of his chin. Judge Rawlins, an old man with a sharp eye and a voice that brooked no nonsense, strode out with the county clerk. He rapped his gavel on the banister. "Let's get to it." Vince Cordell was there, of course, blustering with all the false courage a crowd can lend. He thrust the fake writ at the judge, voice rising. "This woman belongs to the town, Judge. Rourke bought her for $1. He's got no right. She's Comanche and he can't hide her out on his place." Judge Rawlins didn't flinch. "Let me see that paper, son." He read it, frowning, then turned it over in his palm. "This isn't worth spit. Wrong seal, wrong date, and the law doesn't recognize property where there's a name. Miss Nocona." He looked at Tala, who met his eyes, unblinking. "Do you wish to stay with Mr. Rourke, or go?" Tala answered clear, her voice a steady river. "I stay." Doc Hester Quinn stepped forward, laying her hand on the Bible. "If the court please, I tended this woman's wrist last year. That injury was old, healed from a kitchen burn. No sign of violence from Abel Rourke or anyone at his ranch. She's been nothing but cared for." Bertie McCall produced the telegram from Sun Mesa. "No writ ever issued for Tala Nocona, nothing on record. Vince Cordell's claim is just wind." The crowd began to shift, boots scraping, eyes darting. Vince blanched, his anger turning brittle. I stepped up, placed the old Liberty dollar on the railing in front of the judge. "I paid what the town asked, but this here—" I put my hand over Tala's, felt her squeeze back. "This is what matters now. I stand as her protector, by law and by choice." The judge set down his gavel. "This court finds for Mr. Rourke and Miss Nocona. The so-called writ is void. By the authority of New Mexico Territory, I require that if you wish to register as man and wife, it can be done here and now, witnessed by all present." Vince tried one last time, sputtering about Indian law and proper folk, but Sheriff Hale planted himself between us and the mob, badge shining bright. "It's finished, Vince. Time for you to ride out." I turned to Tala. "If you want," but she just nodded once, calm and strong. "I do," she said, voice carrying all the way to the end of the street. Rawlins signed the papers, stamped them with his red seal, hard enough the mark showed through. The crowd melted away, folks nodding quiet, some even smiling. The fight was over, not with a bullet, but with a mark on a page and a vow in the open air. When the dust settled, all that was left was the truth. And the way sunlight fell warm across Tala's shoulders. We left Sun Mesa just as the shadows were growing long, courthouse steps behind us and the taste of dust fresh on the air. There was no crowd now, just me, Tala, and the soft, steady clip of Nolan Begay's horse as he rode a ways behind for company. Folks who'd watched the hearing nodded our way, some quiet, a few giving a tip of the hat that felt less like judgment, more like respect. The road home always feels different after a fight, no matter who won. I sat easy in the saddle, Tala behind me, arms wrapped gentle around my waist. We didn't talk, there was nothing needed saying. All the hard words and soft fears had already been laid out. Back there on the steps under God's blue sky, Yucca Ridge burned gold as we climbed it, the land stretching out quiet, scrub shining in the sun. I listened to the small sounds, the wind through the sage, the squeak of leather, Tala's soft breath in my ear. Every now and then I felt her lean in closer, as if reminding herself she was really here, that it wasn't a dream about to be taken. By the time Cotton Draw came into view, the sky had turned that deep, forgiving color that only comes after a long day spent earning your peace. The porch waited, shadowed but welcoming, the cornflower blue shawl hanging over the rail like a flag in calm weather. I swung down first and reached up for Tala. She slid off, boots touching the earth as if it belonged to her. Nolan rode up, hat low, and nodded. "You folks all right?" His eyes were sharp, but his voice gentle. "We are," I told him, and Tala smiled, quiet and true. Nolan tipped his hat and rode on, dust trailing behind, his presence a silent guard at our back. We stepped onto the porch together. The loose nail I'd worried for weeks was fixed, tight and flush, hammered down just so. Tala brushed her fingers along the rail, pausing where she'd left the string of wolf-track beads. She untied it, placed it in my palm, and closed my fingers around it. "Home," she said, just that one word, but it filled up the dusk like a prayer. Inside, the cabin held the day's warmth. I set the beads beside the old pocket watch, feeling for the first time in years that I could let the past rest and not fear what the morning would bring. Tala set about lighting the lamps, humming low, a tune that felt as old as the land itself. We ate supper in peace, the world outside our walls, quiet as a newborn calf. Afterward, we sat on the steps, watching the stars come out one by one, the ridgeline sharp against the fading sky. I thought of all the miles behind us, the battles fought and words spoken, and understood what it meant to have someone stand beside you, not behind, not ahead, but shoulder to shoulder through wind and storm. Sometimes a journey home is only as long as it takes to reach out a hand and find someone willing to take it. The seasons changed slow out at Cotton Draw, but you noticed it if you paid attention. The corn climbing higher, the breeze softer on your cheek, the shadows stretching longer over rows of beans and wild squash. After Sun Mesa, the work felt lighter, the world a little less sharp around the edges. Tala and I fell into the rhythm of things the way two folks do when there's no more need to guard their hearts. She planted desert marigolds along the fence line, their bright yellow heads bobbing every morning in the wind. The old garden patch I'd let go to weeds now grew strong under her hands. Corn, beans, squash, a few stubborn onions poking through the dirt. I found myself out there beside her most days, sleeves rolled, digging rows and listening to the sound of her humming, a tune I didn't know, but felt like I'd heard all my life. I fixed the leaking roof for good, replaced broken shingles, and even climbed up to take down Mary's old pocket watch from its hook. For years, I'd left it ticking out of habit, but now its glass was cracked and the spring ran slow. I set it in a cedar box lined with soft cloth and whispered, "Rest now, Mary." The house felt bigger for it, like the past finally knew it had a place and didn't need to rattle its chains anymore. Widow Nora Bell showed up with a basket of eggs and a loaf of bread, fussing that Tala's garden made every other patch in Mesquite Bend look lazy. She took Tala under her wing, teaching her the tricks of baking cornbread golden, sweet as prairie honey. Nolan Begay hammered out a new latch for the chicken yard, set it in place without saying much, just a nod that meant more than 100 words. Nights grew cool again, the kind that made you thankful for a fire in the stove and thick quilts on the bed. We read together by lamplight, Tala tracing words with her finger, her voice slow and careful. Sometimes we laughed at my stumbling, sometimes we just sat, the silence warm and gentle. I came to love the way the house settled at night, the beams creaking soft, the world outside gone still except for the faint howl of a coyote far down the ridge. We marked the passing of what had been by simple ritual. I took the burlap sack, same one Vince Cordell had used on that first day, and strung it on a fence post out by the gate. "It's done now," I said. Tala nodded, no tears, just a steady gaze at the horizon, as if seeing every place she'd ever been and letting it all rest. There was healing in the work, stacking firewood, hauling water, kneading bread. There was healing in watching things grow again, not just plants, but hope, trust, and laughter. Even the old blue shawl, washed and mended, hung bright and proud from the porch rail, catching the light like a banner. I realized, sitting with Tala under a sky painted silver and blue, that love in the West was never about grand words or sweeping gestures. It was about showing up every day, every storm, every silent hour, building something that would last longer than a hurt, longer than a memory. It was about doing the work side by side. And as autumn whispered across Yucca Ridge, Cotton Draw Ranch stood peaceful and whole, proof that even in a hard land, something good could grow, if only you gave it the chance. Sometimes life gives you a choice, fast and clear like the crack of a rifle. Other times it asks you to stand slow and steady, to bear witness, to do the right thing even when it don't seem like much at all. That's what I kept thinking as the sun eased down behind Yucca Ridge, painting the porch and every furrowed field in honey gold. There was a stillness to the land, like even the coyotes paused their song for a moment, just to listen. I remembered that first day behind Red Cactus Saloon, the crowd, the shame, the way my voice shook when I said $1, all of it drifting back on the evening breeze. Sometimes the West tests a man not with a gun, but with the courage to open his door and share his roof with a stranger. It's quicker, maybe, to draw a line in the dust. Harder, though, to let someone stay and truly belong. Tala brought out a tin of warm water, set it by my boots. Her touch lingered, soft and sure, no longer uncertain. She'd grown strong in her own way, not by hiding scars, but by living with them, letting the old wounds become a part of the story, not the end of it. We sat side by side on the steps, her hand over mine, wolf track beads warm between our palms. The old blue shawl fluttered on the porch rail, still here, still bright, its threads tighter now than they'd ever been. No words passed between us. There was no need. The hardest journeys end not in thunder or glory, but in quiet. The kind of quiet that heals a soul, softens a memory, lets hope take root. Inside, the fire danced gentle in the stove. The cedar box with Mary's broken watch rested on the mantel, past and present at peace at last. I glanced at Tala, her eyes shining steady in the low light, and I thought of every trial, every word unspoken, every small grace that had stitched this life together. "Home," she said again, and the words settled into me like a prayer answered. Maybe you're reading this, thinking of your own long road, folks you've lost, fights you've braved, or the silent battles you carry alone. Maybe you wonder if there's still a place for peace, for healing, for the kind of love that builds slow and strong, even when the world tries to pull it apart. I hope so. I hope you find it on your porch at sunset, in the laughter of a friend, in the steady hand of someone who won't let go. If you ever walked through a storm and kept your head high, tell me what helped you hold on. Share your story below, even if it's just a few words. And if you'd like to sit a while longer by this fire, hearing more tales of courage and grace out where the land meets the sky, just press follow. There'll always be a place for you at Cotton Draw Ranch every time the sun goes down. And that, my friend, is how the West endures, not with violence or pride, but with hearts that learn to stay. And so, as the last light settles over Cotton Draw, and the evening air grows soft, maybe you find yourself thinking about all the long roads you've walked, or the storms you've weathered, about what it means to truly come home. Out here, folks learn that healing comes slow, built from quiet moments, steady hands, and the courage to stay kind even when the world gets hard. Sometimes it's not the big things that save us, but a simple act. A mended shirt, a name spoken gentle, a seat beside a fire when the day is done. If this story brought back a memory or stirred something true in you, I'd be honored to hear it. Just a word or two down below. Sometimes sharing our piece of the trail helps others find their way. And if you want to spend more time in the company of Western tales like this, I'd be glad to have you join me again. Out here, there's always a place by the fire for one more friend. Until next time, may your road be gentle and your spirit strong, just like the Old West itself.